There is a place in the Venetian Lagoon where boats will not dock, where fishermen will not cast their nets, and where no tourist dares to wander. It lies silent beneath a tangle of vines and ash, hidden in plain sight just south of Venice. On clear days, you can see its crumbling bell tower, rising like a broken finger from the water, beckoning, warning. This is Poveglia Island. To some, it's the most haunted place on Earth. To others, it is simply cursed. For over 1,000 years, Poveglia has absorbed everything humanity fears most: war, plague, madness, fire, isolation, and death. Tens of thousands of people, perhaps over 100,000, were dragged here to die. Plague victims were burned in open pits. The mentally ill were abandoned in crumbling wards. And according to generations of whispered accounts, something else lingered. Something not human. You may not believe in curses. You may not believe in demons. But after Poveglia, you just might believe in something. Long before the name Poveglia became synonymous with plague, madness, and death, it was simply an island of sanctuary. The earliest historical mentions of Poveglia Island date back to the year 421 AD, during one of the most turbulent eras in Western Europe's history, the final collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Italy, fragmented by warring barbarian tribes and devastated by successive invasions, was no longer a place of imperial order and civility. The once proud Roman cities of the Venetia region, Padua, Este, and Altino, had become targets of Visigoth, Punic, and later Lombard raiders. The marshy lagoons to the east, however, offered something that the mainland could not: natural protection. The Venetian lagoon, an expanse of shallow salt water dotted with muddy islets and reeds, acted like a defensive barrier. Raiders on horseback could not easily maneuver in these kinds of waters, and naval attackers had little patience for the maze of channels that only local fishermen knew how to navigate. It was in this precarious historical moment that Poveglia first became inhabited. Families fleeing the chaos of the mainland carried what few possessions they had and rowed eastward in flat-bottomed boats, seeking any land not yet overrun by fire and sword. Among the many islanders they settled, Murano, Torcello, and Burano, was the humble of Popillia, the name being derived from the Latin word populus, meaning poplar tree. The island was small, barely 17 acres, and its high central ground and easy access to fish-rich waters made it suitable for modest settlement. Wooden stilt houses were erected, clustered together on the firmest patch of ground. These early settlers lived off lagoon fishing, salt extraction, and limited agriculture on raised garden plots. Their lives were humble, but they were safe, and this foundation would quietly grow over the centuries. By the 9th century, Poveglia had become a recognizable community within the broader lagoon world. While Venice itself was rising to international prominence as a center of commerce and naval power, Poveglia remained relatively provincial, a fishing village, independent, but tied closely to Venetian authority. During this time, the Republic of Venice established a network of administrators over the lagoon, including the installment of podestas, or governors, to oversee specific islets. Poveglia received its own podesta, suggesting a certain level of population density and economic growth. The island was now governed as a minor administrative district, with the growing Republic of Venice. In 1379, the Republic of Venice faced an existential threat: a full-scale war with its rival maritime empire, the Republic of Genoa. Known as the War of Chioggia, This conflict was not just about territory or trade. It was a struggle for control over the Mediterranean itself. The Genoese fleet launched daring raids across the Venetian Lagoon. Towns, islanders once thought untouchable, were suddenly in peril. Fearing bombardment or occupation, the Venetian authorities ordered the complete evacuation of Poveglia. The Poveglia Goti packed up their lives, clothing, their tools, religious icons, even livestock, and boarded gondolas, fishing boats, and cargo barges. Under escort from armed guards, they were relocated to Giudecca, a larger island closer to the protective walls of Venice itself. The war would end in 1381, with Venice barely victorious. But Poveglia was not so lucky. When the former residents returned, they found their homes razed or looted, their fields salted or burned, and many of their graves desecrated, as well as booby-trapped wells and pits left by retreating enemy forces. The Venetian government declined to fund reconstruction. The people of Poveglia, demoralized and impoverished, chose not to return. Poveglia was no longer a home. It had become a scar. In 1527, the Doge Andrea Guidi offered the island to the Camaldolese monks, known for their quiet devotion and hermetic traditions. But after a brief inspection, the monks declined their offer, stating that the island was too damaged, remote, and spiritually heavy. In 1661, Venice tried again. Surviving descendants were invited back with promises of land titles, trade advantages, and tax exemptions, but the former villagers declined once more. By the end of the 17th century, Poveglia was almost entirely abandoned. Vines overtook the houses. The church of San Vitale began to rot, its wooden beams collapsing. The bell tower, strangely untouched by time or war, became a silent watchtower, and fishermen began avoiding the island, swearing that it was cursed. And still, the real horror had not yet begun. Poveglia's fall from rural haven to Death Island was not swift, but when it happened, it was absolute. By the mid-1500s, the peaceful days of its residents were long past. The church of San Vitale stood in eerie silence. Overgrown paths snaked between collapsing buildings. The island, once full of life, had returned to marsh and moss. But in the eyes of the Venetian Republic, it was not forgotten. It had strategic value, just not for the living. Venice in the 16th century was rich beyond measure. Gold flowed in from the east. Art, culture, and architecture flourished in an unmatched Renaissance bloom. But this wealth came at a cost: exposure. Venetian ships traded across the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and North Africa, and with them came disease, most notably the bubonic plague. The plague, known as the Black Death, had first devastated Venice in 1348, but more insidious waves struck in 1575 to 1577, and again in 1630. In each case, the death tolls were staggering. The 1575 outbreak alone killed more than 50,000 people, which was nearly a third of Venice's population at the time. Faced with this horror, Venice became one of the first governments in Europe to implement an organized quarantine policy. Entire islands were designated as lazareti, or places where the sick and suspected could be isolated from the healthy. Lazaretto Vecchio, near the Lido, and Lazaretto Nuovo were the first. But by the late 1500s, even those were full. The Republic needed another place to send the dying, and they chose Poveglia. The plague pits on Poveglia are unmarked, undocumented in any elegant script, but they are very real. Archaeological studies and local legends agree. The island served as an emergency dumping ground during major outbreaks. Corpses were ferried there in large barges from the city's overloaded hospitals and churches, and those too sick to recover, but not yet dead, were sent there as well. Historical Venetian health ordinances describe rapid transfer of the symptomatic to isolation islands. If a household reported fever, they could be detained and sent to Poveglia within 24 hours, often with no chance to protest. And sometimes entire families were sent based on a single cough or rash. The horrors of these transfers cannot be overstated. There was no medical care provided to these people beyond crude herbal pouches and religious rites. The sick were dumped into makeshift wooden structures, or even into open-air barracks where they'd be exposed to the elements. There was no burial service. Dead bodies were collected with hooks and thrown into mass graves. When the bodies overflowed, they were burned in great pyres. The smoke became visible from the canals of Venice. A report from 1582 by the Venetian Council of Ten mentioned the island of Poveglia is to be used for the disposal of the pestilent dead by fire. This mandate was repeated again in 1630 when another major outbreak crippled the city. Local oral traditions add an even more macabre detail. The soil of Poveglia turned black from the ash of cremated human remains. Some archaeologists estimate that over 50% of the island's topsoil is composed of burned bone, flesh, and ash from plague victims. Even more haunting, the bones still continue to wash ashore to this very day. By the 1700s, Poveglia's reputation was sealed. The island was now firmly associated with death, so much so that the Venetian Health Authority officially designated it as a quarantine checkpoint in 1776. Every ship entering Venice had to stop at Poveglia before proceeding. Medical officers boarded the vessels and inspected the crew and cargo for signs of disease. If even a single person was sick, or if documents showed previous docking at a plague-afflicted port, the entire ship was seized, and the passengers were detained on Poveglia for up to 40 days. This practice gave birth to the modern word quarantine, which is derived from the Italian word 40 giorni, which means 40 days. Facilities were hastily constructed. They included isolation barracks, stone inspection buildings, docking platforms for incoming ships, wards for the dying, and a rudimentary incinerator for the bodies. The old church of San Vitale, which had long since been abandoned, was razed to make room for these structures. The bell tower, however, remained and was retrofitted into a lighthouse. For decades, Poveglia operated as a full quarantine colony. It became known among the Venetians as the Port or Gate of Hell. In 1797, Venice fell to Napoleon Bonaparte, and under French rule, the quarantine system was expanded. The new regime, more militarized and ruthless, used Poveglia for plague victims, military deserters, and prisoners with illness. The French not only burned the bodies, but they conducted mass burials using lime and sealed tombs. There are rumors that Napoleon also hid munitions on the island, using its isolation to store explosive stockpiles. One skirmish is said to have occurred near Poveglia in 1805, when enemy forces discovered the French weapons depot and tried to seize it. Though little documentation remains, multiple oral histories from Venice's Lagoon communities recall cannon fire near Poveglia during this time, and even more deaths. By 1814, Napoleon's empire had fallen, and the Austrians retook control of Venice. The plague had all but disappeared due to vaccination and improved hygiene. The Lazaretto was shut down, but what remained on Poveglia was appalling. Fields of unmarked graves, collapsed buildings used to store plague bodies, furnaces black with soot and fat, and a heavy, choking atmosphere described in 19th century journals as oppressive and vile. This is an excerpt from a traveler's diary from around the year 1822. We passed an island shrouded in black vegetation and eerie silence. My guide called it the land of the damned. He would not speak its name. The air around it seemed to change, became denser, heavier, as if even the seagulls avoided its shore. How many people really perished on Poveglia? Estimates vary wildly, but conservative historians put the number between 80,000 and 100,000 plague victims over the centuries. Some Venetian records suggest it may be closer to 160,000, especially if one includes those dumped in plague years prior to official tracking. If accurate, that would make Poveglia one of the largest mass burial sites in all of Europe. And local lore seems to support this as well. Fishermen near the island have warned that those fishing should never cast nets near Poveglia, or else the dead will bite. Even today, bones turn up in sediment layers and storm surges. There are no headstones, no names, no prayers carved into marble, only charred fragments, crumbling walls, and a legend that was just beginning. After centuries of plague abandonment, Poveglia Island might have faded into quiet obscurity, an overgrown footnote in Venetian history. But in the late 20th century, the Italian state had very different plans. In an age obsessed with modernization and efficiency, the island would be reborn once again, not as a sanctuary, nor as a quarantine station, but as a dumping ground for the unwanted, the mentally ill of society. And with this rebirth came a fresh wave of suffering and whispers of something far worse. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, Italy, like much of Europe, was grappling with how to manage the growing population of the incurably ill, the insane, and the elderly. Mental institutions, or asylums, were expanding rapidly across the country. In 1922, the government of the newly unified Kingdom of Italy authorized the conversion of Poveglia's existing structures into a state-run psychiatric hospital. The logic seemed practical at the time. The island was already isolated, which reduced risk of patient escape or public disturbance. The old military and quarantine buildings could be quickly repurposed, and the surrounding waters made it easy to patrol and control movement. But from the beginning, the staff complained of strange things happening. Reports sent to health administrators in Venice spoke of inexplicable moods, persistent patient hallucinations, and an oppressive air that weighs upon both nurse and doctor. Locals who were already superstitious dubbed it the Island of Madmen. The asylum operated quietly for nearly half a century, and unlike large urban hospitals, Poveglia's facility was small, secretive, and disconnected from most of the mainland infrastructure. Patients were transported by barge from Venice and surrounding areas, and disembarked on a moss-covered dock where rusted iron gates barred entry. Once inside, they joined a permanent population of psychiatric patients, people diagnosed with things such as schizophrenia, mania, or severe depression, elderly patients with dementia or Alzheimer's, as well as what they would consider criminally insane people. The hospital likely peaked at about 150 to 200 patients, cared for by a skeletal staff of nuns, nurses, and 2 or 3 doctors at a time. Remnants of this era remain today. There are peeling signs that still hang above doorways, rusting hospital beds scattered throughout overgrown wings, stained restraint straps still bolted to old mattress frames, and steel cabinets filled with ancient ampules, scalpels, and handwritten files. Most disturbingly, in the basement archives of Venice's municipal hospital system, there are missing patient records from Poveglia. Entire ledgers from the 1930s to 1950s are inexplicably blank. Whether this was due to war damage, fire, or something more sinister, the absence of documentation has allowed a forest of legend to grow unchecked. Of all the tales to emerge from Poveglia, none is more persistent or chilling than the legend of the Mad Doctor. According to local oral history, and repeated by dozens of paranormal researchers, a lead physician in the 1930s became obsessed with curing mental illness through radical, untested procedures. His name is unknown. Some say he was called Dr. Apollo. Others simply called him the Ill Doctor. His methods included crude lobotomies, allegedly performed using hand drills and chisels. He would isolate patients in the bell tower, which became a sort of punishment chamber, and there would be no use of anesthesia. The screaming patients were instead restrained. Several former staff interviewed in the 1970s by paranormal journalist Andrea Lanari described the upper floors of the hospital as a chamber of echoes, one that was filled with cries that went unanswered for days. One surviving note from a nun reads, "I no longer enter the upper wing. The doctor conducts his work alone. He says he is visited by voices that guide his hands, and the patients do not return." The bell tower, already infamous for its centuries-old watch over plague fires, became central to the legend. It is said that the doctor took patients to the top and performed purification rituals under the moonlight, procedures meant to banish their madness. Some claim that there was no medical treatment at all, but a form of occult experimentation. In recent years, the theory has emerged among demonology researchers that the doctor may have been attempting to contact something on the island, either the souls of plague victims or something far darker. Eventually, the legend claims that the doctor himself began to lose his mind. Patients and nurses alike reported seeing him speaking to empty rooms, writing symbols on the walls with chalk and ash, and he would later disappear for days, then reemerge covered in soot and blood, and muttering in Latin phrases that no one seemed to recognize. Then, one night, he ascended the bell tower for the last time. What happened next is at the core of Poveglia's ghost lore. Some say he leapt to his death, overwhelmed by guilt and madness. Others say he was pushed by one of his surviving patients, perhaps one driven by revenge. And still, others insist that it was a shadowy figure that led to his demise, something that wasn't human at all, one that appeared behind him and hurled him over the edge. One nurse reportedly witnessed the event and claimed that he survived the fall, but lay broken and moaning at the base of the tower. A black mist rose from the earth, witnessed by 2 orderlies, and choked the life out of him where he laid. His body was never buried according to the lore. Some say that it was thrown into the furnace beneath the hospital. Others claim that his remains were sealed in the bell tower itself. Today, the tower stands empty but intact. Its stairs are rotting, and its windows are shattered. Yet visitors and illegal trespassers have sworn that they have heard screaming from its top chamber, even though the structure is inaccessible. Locals say that on some nights, the bell tolls, even though it was removed in 1806. By 1946, after World War II, the psychiatric hospital's role began to shift. It was increasingly used as a geriatric care facility, housing elderly Venetians with dementia, strokes, and long-term conditions. But the reputation of the island never recovered. Patients frequently reported seeing shadows, hearing voices, and experiencing violent nightmares. Some claim that they were even attacked by unseen forces during the night. Staff reported feeling dread even on calm days, and several doctors transferred away after only months of service, citing emotional instability and constant dread. Finally, in 1968, the hospital was abruptly closed. No official reason was given, and all of the patients that still remained there were transferred elsewhere. The generators were shut off, and the boats stopped coming. Poveglia was left once again to rot. Even after its closure, the stories persisted. A local fisherman in the 70s claimed that he heard a woman crying on the beach, but only found a child-sized footprint in the sand. Paranormal investigations in the early 2000s captured EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, in Italian, saying phrases like, "Let them burn," and "I'm not alone." Multiple visitors, including journalists and urban explorers, claimed to be overcome with violent nausea, headaches, or fits of aggression, as though something malevolent was influencing their minds. The psychiatric hospital and the legend of the Mad Doctor are now woven permanently into Poveglia's identity. Some say the doctor still walks on the island, tormented by what he did, and others claim that the real horror is what he awakened, an entity, perhaps a demonic one, that now inhabits the bell tower itself. After the closure of Poveglia's hospital in 1968, the island was once again left to decay. But unlike its earlier periods of silence, this abandonment was not peaceful, as nature crept over the cracked flagstones and vines strangled the broken windows. A new chapter began, one not dictated by government orders or epidemic policy, but by legend, fear, and fascination. Poveglia was no longer just an island. It had become a myth, a warning, a dare whispered at bonfires and repeated by thrill seekers across continents. If you want to go see hell on earth, go to Poveglia Island. Following the last evacuation in 1968, the island's docks, wards, and bell tower were sealed off, but not guarded. Italian authorities had no intention of redeveloping it, nor did they dismantle any infrastructure. It was simply left to rot. Local residents across the lagoon began to share secondhand accounts. Strange lights, guttural voices drifting across the water, and the phantom tolling of the bell tower. By the early 1970s, Venetian fishermen stopped dropping their nets nearby. They would say, "Don't fish there. The dead are too many, and they don't like to be disturbed." And they weren't alone. The taboo grew stronger with each generation, and Poveglia became a place to avoid. Not out of superstition alone, but because of its heavy atmosphere. A few brave teenagers would dare each other to row across at night, and many returned pale and shaken. Others refused to speak about what they saw. From the 1980s onward, Poveglia's haunted reputation grew internationally, fueled by reports and testimonies from those who had trespassed onto the island. Shadow figures seen in the hospital windows or walking the bell tower's balcony. Voices in Venetian dialect heard calling out to non-existent companions. Apparitions in plague doctor robes, complete with the infamous beaked mask. A small girl seen running along the shore, vanishing before the observer's eyes. And burning smells with no fire or smoke present. The sound of gurneys rolling across tile floors, echoing through buildings long stripped of furniture. In nearly every account, visitors describe a sudden sense of dread or sickness, sometimes accompanied by nausea, panic attacks, or nosebleeds. Multiple accounts claim that people fainted upon entering the central courtyard or the bell tower's threshold. A notable story from 1999 came from a mystery-based construction team that was assigned to assess the island for potential redevelopment. 3 workers entered the asylum and left within 1 hour. One later told a local reporter, "It was like the walls were breathing. We heard whispers, loud enough to be people. But we were alone. I felt watched, like prey. I'll never go back." The island's legend exploded internationally after the American paranormal television show Ghost Adventures featured Poveglia in a 2009 episode. Zach Bagans, host of the series, claimed that the island had the most concentrated paranormal activity that he had ever encountered. The crew received special permission from the Italian government to spend the night alone on the island, a privilege granted to almost no one before or since. Their investigation included captured EVPs in Italian and Latin, a moment of alleged possession where Zach shouted incoherently and seemed to be overtaken by rage. Unexplained loud bangs and voices, along with object movements, and a chair that was thrown across the room by an invisible force. The crew fled the island in panic by morning, and the episode became one of their most viewed and controversial to date. From then on, Poveglia was considered by many to be the most haunted island in the world. In 2014, the Italian government, strapped for cash amid economic crisis, began exploring ways to generate income from unused state property. Poveglia, long abandoned and costing maintenance fees, was listed for lease auction. The plan was to offer a 99-year lease to a private developer on the condition that they redevelop the island in a way that preserved historical structures. The starting bid was around 500,000 euros, or roughly $704,000 US. A Venetian entrepreneur, Luigi Brugnaro, submitted the highest bid and won the rights. He proposed building a luxury hotel or wellness retreat, complete with spa and private docks. But outrage quickly followed. A local movement known as Poveglia for Everyone rose in protest, raising funds and public support to stop the privatization of the island. They demanded Poveglia be preserved as a historical and cultural site, not a playground for the elites. Their campaign gained traction, and as a result, the government canceled the lease. Ironically, Brugnaro would go on to become mayor of Venice, but officially renounced any claims to Poveglia, perhaps recognizing its controversial nature. And to this day, no private or public development has been approved. Today, Poveglia is closed to the public. It is illegal to set foot on the island without express government permission. The buildings are collapsing, riddled with rot, roots, and wildlife. Trees grow out of staircases, and ivy chokes the windows. Still, that doesn't stop trespassers. Urban explorers from Italy, Germany, and America have illegally boated in under the cover of darkness. Some leave shaken and silent, and others post blurry videos of shadowy figures, EMF readings, and disembodied cries on the internet. Here's what's been documented in recent years. Bones found near the old furnace exposed by storms. Apparitions allegedly captured in infrared and night vision cameras in the bell tower. Multiple audio anomalies, especially near the plague pits and psychiatric wards. EMF surges in rooms with no wiring. And visitors possessed or overcome with violence and confusion, particularly near the old surgical theater. The locals still warned that there are things that live there, and they're not people, not anymore. Parapsychologists and demonologists studying the site offer several hypotheses as to what could be happening there. Residual hauntings, centuries of death imprinted psychic energy that's made its way into the soil. Intelligent spirits, some souls that have remained trapped and are aware and vengeful. Demonic activity. The belief that something non-human was awakened, possibly during the doctor's experiments. And the thin veil theory, that the sheer scale of suffering caused a permanent tear between this world and the next. As one prominent Italian exorcist put it in 2006, if there was a place that invites the devil, it is Poveglia. Archaeologists have confirmed that plague layers containing charred bones extend beneath nearly every major structure. The island's soil is not normal. It's composed of centuries of ash, lime, and human bone. There is no official mass grave marker, no memorial, and no protective oversight. Poveglia is, in essence, an open grave. And with every storm, the past rises closer to the surface, and perhaps so do the dead. There are places in the world where horror clings like fog, and Poveglia is among said places. What separates Poveglia is that its pain spans centuries, from the first plague victims thrown into mass graves, to the condemned souls in a mad doctor's asylum, to the voiceless thousands burned without burial, to the modern generations too afraid to even say its name. It's not merely haunted, it's tainted, saturated, and possibly even cursed. Some believe that it is an open gate, a tear in the veil between worlds. Others believe it is simply the cost of forgetting. When a place becomes a garbage dump for the sick and insane, history will not be kind in return. Whatever the truth is, however, Poveglia continues to endure. To some, it is the most haunted place on Earth, and to others, just another place. You may not believe in curses, you may not believe in demons, but as I mentioned in the beginning, after Poveglia, you just might believe in something. Thank you guys so very much for watching this latest episode. At the advice of a very good friend with a much larger channel, I've decided to give this new style another go. This way it can help me deliver some content to you guys a little bit faster. And if you enjoyed the story, please give the video a like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. You can also enjoy my content ad-free and get some bonus stuff by clicking join here on YouTube to become a channel member, or by visiting patreon.com/mysteryarchives. And if you want a blanket or a shirt or even copies of my books, you can visit my official store at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. All of these will be linked down in the description below, and I truly appreciate you guys, and I'll see you very soon with another new episode. In the meantime, check out another video of mine that's going to be popping up here by the end of this episode, and I've also linked a playlist containing all of my episodes, so you can kind of maybe see what you have seen and what you haven't. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care, and I'll see you next time.